The Last of Us. So I finally got around to playing it, and I wish I got into it a lot sooner because, wow, this game is incredible. I feel like when you think of single player games, right, you have this kind of subgenre of these almost like really cinematic and kind of next level games that are kind of on a higher level than any other normal single player game. You know, you think of your God of War, Red Dead 2, Ghost of Tsushima, you know, all these really just incredibly beautiful games with super realistic graphics and just a very cinematic feel to them. And I feel like The Last of Us is almost like the main one, aside from maybe like Red Dead 2. I think when you think of like iconic and just really top tier single player like story experiences, The Last of Us is kind of like the main one you think of. And unfortunately, I actually went into this game after already experiencing the show, which I did really like. I thought the show was incredible, and I even, back when the show came out, I even wanted to go and play the game beforehand, but I just didn't really get around to it. I think I was playing through a couple other games at the time, and I'm kind of the type of person that doesn't really like playing more than, say, 2 or 3 games at a time. So I never ended up playing the game before I watched the show, but I still really got a ton out of the show. I mean, it was incredible, and after playing the game, I can definitely say both are amazing. I remember watching the show and kind of piecing together which parts I kind of thought were, you know, gameplay segments, which parts were very obviously cutscenes. And I had heard that the show was almost beat for beat with the game in terms of adaptation. And I think that's what played into its success, being an adaptation of an already incredibly good story. I mean, you see all these other video game adaptations just absolutely tarnishing the source material. And it goes to show that if you want to make something truly successful, it's not that hard to simply just copy one for one the source material. And yes, I know The Last of Us didn't exactly do that. They definitely added and changed a lot of things, but these were all for the better. And as far as like the main narrative, they did basically go beat for beat. But let's talk about the game itself. So there are actually a ton of different versions of The Last of Us. So I was a bit confused at first as to, you know, which version I should play. There is, of course, the original The Last of Us that came out on PS3. Then you have The Last of Us Remastered, which actually released only a year later, in 2014 for the PS4. So it was a slight, you know, update to graphics for the modern console. But then with the PS5, they released The Last of Us Part 1 in 2022, and this was essentially a full remake for the PS5, and I think it's also on the PS4. I'm not too sure, I'd have to double check on that, but essentially they remade a lot of the models, and you know, the lighting is way better, everything about it just looks miles better than, you know, the original. But it is, you know, at its core, the same game, and is by far the kind of definitive way to play the game. And so that's the one I played, and wow, it is truly incredible. I just remember that first part of the game where you're running through that town when the outbreak is kind of just starting, and it is just absolute chaos. You know, all the infected are running around, and you're having to carry Sarah to safety, and it is horrifying. I mean, the show did a really good job presenting, you know, this horrible nightmare situation. You know, everybody's running, there's even a plane crashing, which I think added a ton of, you know, intensity. But the game, because you're actually there, you know, you're controlling Joel, you have that autonomy over him, I feel like it makes it a little more intense than the show. I would say the show did a lot better in terms of making it feel much more chaotic with, you know, the plane crash. I think there was just a lot more going on. But the game still does a great job. There are, you know, a lot of car explosions, and especially that sequence where you're running from that one infected through all those rooms just before, you know, you go out into that field with the soldier that, you know, shoots you. It is intense, let me just say. You know, I mean, it really does just keep you engaged. And another thing I really want to praise, and I'm not sure if this is, something that may just be with the with part 1, the newest version, or if this was the case, with the original, but the animations and the scripted events are all really, really well done, really well polished. I mean, the animations of, going from normal gameplay to like a quick time event or straight into a cutscene, it's all so, seamless, so fluid. And man, the graphics do look beautiful. I played this on my PS5 and it is next level. And honestly, very surprising because there's been a couple games I've played recently, games that came out in the last, couple months. I was playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, a couple other games, that are very high quality single player games, and they honestly just don't come close to this level of quality. And I think that's a huge testament to Naughty Dog here. Granted, they do have, the benefit of building on a previous game. I'm sure it's probably easier to simply take an older game and improve its graphics rather than, building a game from the ground up. But, I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't know for sure. But getting to that heart-pounding scene with Joel and Sarah is, oh my god. I mean, I'd seen this cutscene several times before playing the game just because of how popular it is. I'd seen it on YouTube. I'd obviously seen it in the show, and I thought Pedro Pascal did a great job performing that scene. But I mean, experiencing it for yourself in the game, after playing as Sarah, after playing as Joel, after experiencing, everything that came before, and then that scene plays and really just, getting to take in all the emotion, it truly was a kind of, like, hey, this is a game, this is something that you're going to want to pay attention to. And I feel like I'm not a big single player game person. I've played my fair share of single player games, throughout my life, but I was always, I feel like, more drawn to multiplayer games. I've always enjoyed playing games with friends and with others. And I feel like the few single player games I have played are, slightly older. I feel like this is one of the more, like, modern single player games that I've played. I mean, the only other ones I can really think of off the top of my head are, of course, Elden Ring, which isn't as cinematic. There's the Jedi Fallen Order games, which I absolutely love. But this is, I feel like, truly on another level. So yes, the story is incredible and really immersive, but honestly, I do think it's the gameplay where this game shines the most for me. There are a ton of really great segments where you're given a lot of agency over, how you want to approach something. You can use stealth, you can go in guns blazing, and every option is valid. The stealth in this game is honestly really, really fun. I would definitely say the infected were my favorite part of the combat, mainly because of the variety of all the different types. Obviously, you have the first form, which is, basically just a normal zombie. They still have their vision and everything. But once you get to the clicker, oh my gosh, it gets so fun. The clickers obviously can't see, so you still have to use stealth because, they can't hear you. But it's so cool being able to kind of slowly sneak up to them, and you can be right in their face because they can't see you. And then once you're right next to them, as long as you're not making any noise, you can just take them out. And I think it's cool that they did make the clickers a bit more challenging because, yes, they are blind. Yes, they're easier to, get a stealth kill on. But you need to have a shiv, which requires a couple crafting materials, which are very, very limited. Maybe it's just because I wasn't exploring quite enough, but I genuinely think the resource management makes this game very difficult in some scenarios because there's a lot of times where you might be very, very low on ammo, or maybe just completely out of crafting materials that might make, certain parts easier. And the game is still very, manageable if you are low on ammo or, crafting materials or whatever it be. But that sense of, you are running out of resources and you might be, in a pretty bad spot makes a lot of the parts in this game very intense. And it makes your decisions of, using your resources a lot more engaging. You have to be, conscious of, okay, how many bullets do I have? Should I be using them for this? Or maybe should I save them for, later if I might need them more? And it also plays into stealth or just going guns blazing. You know, if you just go in shooting, you're gonna waste a lot more ammo than if you go a lot more stealthily and, use your melee. Honestly, my biggest gripe with, all the infected sections throughout the game is just that there's not enough. There's plenty for sure, but I feel like there's a lot more parts where you're just fighting normal people. And I know that's kind of, part of the story. It's usually the, real people that are a lot more scary than the infected. And it makes sense for, all the situations that they're in. But I wouldn't have minded, at least one or two more, especially near the end. I know there was a longer section with infected at the end, but I wouldn't have minded, a slightly longer part, a little more challenge, because I genuinely loved fighting the infected. But even normal raiders, I mean, the fluid combat and, how all the guns feel to shoot, especially on the PS5 controller with that, resistance on the trigger, it all really just feels amazing. And I can't praise the combat enough. I genuinely think it's really, really fun. But another big part of why I think I enjoyed the game more than the show is also just the time you spend with these characters. Yes, the show is pretty long, but you're going to be spending a lot more time with the characters when playing the game. And of course, you're controlling Joel, you're controlling Ellie. So I felt a kind of much more tangible connection with the characters. I felt like I kind of really understood their relationship a bit better because you're literally with them throughout almost every single part of this story. And you're also, having a hand in what they do. So I think that kind of goes a long way in making these characters, feel real, feel relatable. One thing I will say, which I think was a little more prevalent in the kind of prequel chapter, Left Behind, was the insane amount of people that Ellie alone can go up against and come out on top. This is very clearly a video game thing. There's plenty of, very realistic cinematic games that do this where, the player character will go up against overwhelming odds where if this was real life in any scenario, they would not survive. And that's just, part of the video game. I mean, yes, it's not exactly in line with the story. It wouldn't make sense for Ellie to be able to single-handedly fend off, 30, 40 guys. But, it adds to the fun of the gameplay, giving you, a lot more challenge, more combat to enjoy. So I think, there's a kind of balance there. And it's something that I probably wouldn't have noticed if it wasn't for the show, because the show obviously dials things back a lot more. Even Joel, who is very clearly a seasoned killer. Like, he knows what he's doing, he can handle himself. And in the game, he is way, way more deadly. I mean, you're killing, hordes of raiders, hordes of infected, all by yourself. And obviously, again, it's a video game. It makes sense for there to be somewhat unrealistic odds. And then, you look at the show, and Joel in the show is only going up against a couple people at a time. But again, I think it really reared its head during the Left Behind chapter where you're playing as Ellie and you just absolutely slaughter, I want to say 20 guys. It's pretty funny, but I mean, again, it's combat, it's a video game, so I didn't really have too much of an issue with it. Now, I know I keep, relating to the show, and again, that's because I saw the show first, so, that was my basis for this game, and so a lot of my going into it was, unfortunately, judging the game based off of what I had seen in the show. And I kind of regret that, but I do think I came out of this still enjoying the game a lot more, and I think aside from the story, the gameplay was more than enough to differentiate the game. But I will say, if we're looking at the game just by itself, if I'm forgetting the show and looking at the game's story and the game's pacing, I think it's phenomenal, because there is a lot of long gameplay segments, and that you're not really getting that in the show, right? So with all these really long gameplay segments, the story is still sprinkled in very, very nicely, and the pacing is really good too. Because, I mean, you're going from a long kind of stealth section with a lot of infected to maybe a more, chaotic intense situation with a bunch of raiders all, shooting at you. And then you have, a long cutscene or a couple long cutscenes to really take in the story and taking a breather. There's a few parts where you're literally just walking. You just hear dialogue between Joel and Ellie, really solidifying their relationship and, keying you in on their characters. And these parts are really important to the story, and I think they're handled really well throughout the game. And I would definitely say the best example of really good pacing is the switch up near the end where you get to play as Ellie. Because yes, Joel is fun to play, but getting to play as Ellie feels a little different. You feel smaller, you feel more weak, you feel more vulnerable. And yes, it's obviously due to the story reasons. You are literally all those things, but also you are less equipped. You don't have as many tools or anything as Joel. And so it's a really good kind of switch up from the norm that you've gotten used to throughout the game. But also story-wise, it works really, really well because you've been playing as Joel throughout the entire game, and suddenly the character that you've been playing as, that you've grown a connection to, is in a dire situation. They might die, and your goal is to try and save their life, to, draw away all these raiders from potentially finding him. But it's made even more intense because you're also playing as Ellie and you're much more vulnerable. I just think that sequence is really, really well done, and it mixes up the game phenomenally. Overall, I absolutely adored this game. I genuinely think it's one of the best games I've played. While I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites of all time, it is definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. I mean, I had a ton of fun enjoying it. It's rare that, a game hooks me to where it is all I want to play, and every time I'm not playing it, it's all I'm thinking about playing. So just that alone goes to show that this is a very, very good game. I have not played The Last of Us Part 2 yet. I am going to. I'll probably make a video on it on this channel as well. But I am very excited. I unfortunately know what happens in, the first bit of the game. I've been spoiled almost the entire game, actually. Not, every little detail, but as far as like the big plot points, I know what's gonna happen. But I'll still play it. I will do my best to enjoy it, and I'll let you guys know if I like it or if maybe I don't, because I've heard it's slightly controversial. Anyways, that about wraps up this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you want to see any other, game reviews or other kinds of fun video ideas. As always, my name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.